Great.
Oh, hi, everyone.
Hey there.
Nice to see you.
So this is our third in the series on alchemy and yoga, the process of alchemy as it is reflected in yoga. And this week it is called the Philosophers Stone, is the title of this talk. And we'll be building on what we've gone over the last couple of weeks. And one thing that is, to remind you is that this process is ongoing all the time, the process of alchemy. And when one focuses in certain ways, the process really takes off. And whether it's the process of, the alchemical pot of turning substances into gold, or the process of yoga itself, it is an ongoing process. And the Philosopher's Stone is a really interesting angle to it. And as we did last week, we would like to begin with the chant.
Oh, okay. Oh. So we're doing the Shantipad. And shall we chant it just through?
Sure.
Would you like?
Go for it. And someone is not muted, so can you make sure you're muted, please?
Om Purnam Adab Purnam Idam Purnat Purnam Udachyate Purnasya Purnam Adaya Purnam Eva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Okay. So again, a quick translation. Purnam Adha. Purnam means complete and whole, everything perfect. So that is, whatever that is, but also this. So anything that we left out, like this, that is also the complete and perfect whole. And so when you take, or when the whole comes out of the whole remains completely whole, even as you take the whole out of the whole.
This is why we never have dinner parties, because this conversation always comes up.
And then Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. And so the three Shantis get rid of three types of klesha, or misery. And so this is a very funny Shantipat, as you know, and it's really pointing out the fact that intelligence, or the pure intelligence, is indefinable, and that the nature of reality, or the Purnam, is this complete mystery, which is beyond being reduced to codes and ideas, even though we can't help it. And so it's pointing out again the paradox of knowledge structures, that no knowledge structure, even a good one, can include itself. And so this sense of the paradox of any type of knowledge structure will give you the double-edged sword of
discriminating awareness.
And so Mercury, who is the god, the Mercurius, he has a sword like that. And so does Manjushri. I think maybe they've conspired. Okay. So they have the double-edged sword, and the double-edged sword of course, slices through any kind of confusion where you think that either the thing you're examining has some separateness ultimately to it. All of its separateness is totally context dependent, and then that any subject or observer, any which arises instantly, also has any independent, separate self. So it is all interdependent. And essentially, the sword shows us that there is no separate self at all. It is shunyata. So it's a very good thing to have.
And as we talked about the process of the alchemical pot and the necessity of creating a container, that in some perspectives could seem that it was quite separate from everything else. In fact, the alchemy cannot really happen until it is the sealed pot, but then the insight exists that it is part of the outside of that pot as well.
Yeah. And so we'll make images of the pot. I think of, sometimes really simple pots. I think of pot bellies. I also think of horrible, more traditional things for the stage called nigredo, which is basically you're locked in a grave or a tomb, and it's really stinky, and there's decomposition, and it's degrading, and it's full of not only poo, but all kinds of organic substances that one wouldn't want to be. And so all of these are my theories of the pot, which, and some of them are wonderful theories, but that isn't what we're talking about. Sorry, but you can't help but make an image of the pot at this stage. And so if you see an image of the pot arising in the mind, know that that image of the pot needs to be tossed into the pot. Okay. And so the double-edged sort of keeps you from getting confused by metaphors.
And hence the idea of the snake eating its own tail. And what happens in that process of alchemy is, we have this transformation that takes place, and what the real gold that is produced in the process of alchemy is not the gold that you might make a piece of jewelry out of, although that would be nice, but it is the truly valuable substance, which is wisdom. And that's really what the Philosopher's Stone gets at. And we talked about a couple of the different goddesses that are representative of different parts of this process, like Lakshmi, who, because of the churning, because of the sealing of the pot and the churning of the ocean, she comes forth and she represents gold, which becomes this imagery we can use to transform and to slip into this process of alchemy that results in wisdom.
Yeah.
So
she becomes a metaphor.
She becomes the metaphor.
And in the old days, back in I guess we're talking a few thousand years ago, the belief in alchemy was that gold actually wasn't such a transcendent metal as it turns out it actually is, but that gold could be produced through this magical process of alchemy. And then, modern science comes along and
ruined
pops
everything.
our bubble. But then we find that gold can be produced, but it's not so easy. So in ordinary natural systems, gold does not react with anything. And part of the beauty of alchemy is that when two things meet, if they really interact, just like two chemicals, both are changed. Okay. And so but what's happening in our metaphor is that the gold that, in modern gold doesn't react with anything. That's part of its beauty, which is what gives it so much value. It is produced, in thermonuclear uh, pressure and collapse, and then it can be easily produced. But what happens is that gold turns out that it doesn't interact just like our ideals of who we are or of what truth is. Um, if you're lost in those ideals through ignorance, um, then you don't actually get an interaction, but the ideal of the gold dominates. And so there's a beautiful saying that, the emperor, he goes out and he's become totally old and is breaking down, but he's so proud of himself, like, we are and everything. And he thinks, I got it. I have the truth. I've got the Purnam. And when in fact, he has the idea that he has the Purnam, and he has an idea of what Purnam is. And he goes out and it is like a little candle that's running out of fuel. And he goes out and he holds his candle up to the sun. And he says, here is the truth. And he's pointing towards the little flame. And then the sunshine is out. And it's like a ridiculous joke and so that's what happens at a certain point. And with that sort of awareness, you're able to see that. And it's just like, it's almost stunning. And in the right context, it's almost humorous. And so it goes into the pot too. So all of the products of our ego function go into the pot. There's a very cool saying that, who's this guy? Oh, Heraclitus. Yeah. And
Pull it in front of you so you stay on the camera.
Yeah, I stay on the camera. He also is the one that says, so, as above, so below.
Oh,
He's
yeah.
very famous. Nature loves to hide herself. Okay, so for yogis, that immediately goes, uh-huh. And then there's a parallel statement, Paroksha Deva Priyaha, that the gods love what is Paroksha, or out of sight. And that can be different ways of interpreting that, but they love what is out of sight. And so what is out of sight is what is Purnam, or completely full. In other words, it's irreducible to a formula. And nature loves to hide herself, and she then is just like the Adishesha or Anantashesha, who manifests as Shesha, or as that which supports everything, like the floor, like your feet, like your pelvic floor, like nature. And nature is just in love. And so all of these alchemists who finally get the philosophers, they're in love. And they just love helping. And they don't, and they've kind of lost their theoretical, they've seen through their theoretical selves. They haven't really lost them, but the theoretical self is now just some a method for serving others. And so they go around and they are just like Adi Shesha. They say, I just want to help. And I don't care if anybody gives me a lot of credit for that. So they've lost this stage of alchemy that many of us get stuck in forever, in which we're fascinated by the gold or by the theories that the mind has made about us. And so we become that.
And so when you say they're in love, it's really meaning they're not in love with an object.
Yeah.
And they're not in love the way we would interpret, I'm in love with this other person, or I'm in love with chocolate, or
Yeah. And usually we're in love with our image.
Or myself.
Yeah. And it's a form of our own projection.
Yeah.
Which Jung in his alchemy says the anima or the animus, depending on what your social identity is. It's just all those things that you kind of want, you project. And so you rarely meet another person, but when you actually do, then it's like And so there's the famous thing in the Gita where Krishna, in a number of places, says, well, and he's talking about thousands and thousands of, really good practitioners, good yogis. And then he goes, and they work forever, but hardly any one of them really knows me. And that's a very deliberate thing, because when you know this, you kind of uh, are letting go in this deeper wisdom of all of these images. And so even though there is a historically a generating self or idea, it disappears. Um, and so you're not really that thing. And you go in and you're not really different from the beloved, but you're not the same as the beloved, because to be different, you'd have to have two formulas that would make them different. And to be identical, that's also a formula of the mind. It's just, oh, it's just one thing. I am one with God. Therefore, oh, I am God. Therefore. And so the uh, intelligence, if it's not tuned, can really go off the rails
And so that
quickly.
this is really what wisdom is, right? And really what the Philosopher's Stone is about, is this idea of this wisdom being something so beyond thought and object and form, but yet completely wrapped up in those things in a way. And we've been talking recently a little about this idea, and we may have said this in another talk here, but this form of wisdom really has this an intuitive aspect to it, where it is unspeakable, unnameable, you cannot really truly codify it, and you don't want to. And that's the intuitive world. And to get into that intuitive space oneself, which really is this space of the alchemical process, you rely on the union of the gut feeling in your embodied experience, the gut feeling of truth and meaning and beauty, and the gut feeling of right and wrong that is a familiar feeling to you, whether or not you are conscious of it. It's something that all of us have experienced. But that has to be in union with the insight that comes from clear thinking. And when those two come into union, then there is this intuitive wave that really is where compassion and where love and where wisdom reside.
Yeah, so the idea that history is actually something we all share, okay? And conspiracy theorists aside, histos, or the nature, flesh, geology, astronomy, cultural history, all of these things, they are things that we make theories about, and we have, and we need to make theories about them in order to navigate. But the histos, it's actually there, and it's something we share. But unfortunately, you can't really put your finger on it, so to speak, or maybe the Philosopher's Stone, you can't. And so the embodiment is the key. And so this is the key in all of the different traditions, is you're going to find that embodiment is really that which you are sitting on. And so, as we know in yoga, if you have one thing, then you, through meditation, you kind of unite it with its opposite. And so this is why the queen and the king, or the sun and the moon, those are symbolic as, and of course, in our experience, it just so happens that the sun and the moon are, conveniently so that when you have a solar eclipse, it really does a good job of it. It's quite beautiful. And so this and our own cultural sharing, all of us are all around the world share the sun and the moon, but of course we have different stories and different cultural interpretations of it. But you're uniting one thing with its complementary opposite, and that could be hot and cold, heat and distress, and things about my personality that I then project into you, and things that you project into me. And by you unite them viscerally, or in what was the word we were using? Intuitively, or in a gut
In a gut sense.
In a gut sense. And this is actually the immediate arising of sensation is the gut. And so when we talk about the gut sense, we don't literally necessarily mean the gastrointestinal tract, although it's quite amazing if you study it. And we all share, in some way that. So we go through the body and we unite opposites. And this is from side to side, front to back, top to bottom. And then in terms of mind, because past and future are creations of mind, past and future, these are other directions. And when you experience that their interdependence with their opposite physically, or in terms of prana, immediate arising, we say sensation, but remember, sensation might not be what you think sensation is. So that's always very important in the alchemical process. You go, oh yeah, I'm going back to meditate on my breath. Okay, which actually, initially is pretty easy, but then your theories of the breath might not be exactly, they will guide you to, if they're good theories, being able to observe pure sensation. And so the Philosopher's Stone are the Shesha is considered pure sensation, which is beyond description. However, sensation gives rise, or patterns of sensation, or samskaras of sensation give rise to storylines. And then the story, if you find the history, you can start to transform the storyline until finally you have that experience of the unspeakable. And so it's called the Philosopher's Stone, not that philosophers are stoned, but the Philosopher's Stone is because it's right in front of your eyes. And that's a different meaning, that the truth loves to hide because the truth is very shy. And so what is right in front of your eyes is not what you think is in front of your eyes. And this is why you look again. So it said that which you're sitting on is the Philosopher's Stone. And so you've looked everywhere, high and low, for endless numbers of lifetimes. And there you are, you're sitting on it the whole time. And it's the most rejected thing culturally, in most cultures. The idea of the Philosopher's Stone is not rejected, but the actual Philosopher's Stone is like, yeah, I'm not interested in that, because it might have to do with experiencing your own shadow sides, and it might have to do with actually having the courage to experience nature, the environment, actually what air and breath and light and all of those things that are enormously infinite and will absorb the attention without the need of thought constructions. And thought constructions can help this is the samadhis, but then as you get absorbed, you just toss them aside. You don't need them anymore.
Yeah.
So there's a beautiful metaphor that Mercurius, remember Mercury, Mercury was racing the tortoise. Uh,
Which we did every week.
oh, well, I love that story because what it does is it turns everything into stone, but not in the sense of Philosopher's Stone, um, because it freezes things due to conceptual reductionism. And so even Mercury, who is super cool and super fast, uh, he can't beat the tortoise. But Mercury, through the alchemical process, is given winged shoes.
Mhm.
And so, and with the winged shoes, which come from his applying the different chemicals, particularly the scary ones of like sulfur with his own mercurial nature, so that you get this initial samadhi and this um, he no longer, it takes what is mistaken to be a path. I'll teach me the path of alchemy or the path of yoga or the lineage of yoga. And you think, oh, and it is, of course, you're doing practically step by step, but um, it gives you what we would call alchemical slippers,
Yeah.
in which you're actually walking on the Philosopher's Stone,
Mhm.
but you're totally free. You don't. It doesn't define. You're not obliged to any kind of path. And so the idea is that Mercurius, could then, with his winged shoes, can even beat the turtle, which is
Good news.
pretty fast. Yeah. Fortunately,
Finally.
he beats the turtle, and because he has no path, or he's not stuck in any kind of reductionism, and uh, and so then, if you find this reality, it's not you and it's not you, but in the sense of bhakti in the Gita, you are then with the beloved in the heart, and the two can dance,
Mhm.
wearing alchemical, wearing Mercurius's winged slippers, and that's what's a beautiful metaphor for the stone.
Yeah. And so the true wisdom then manifests when you give it up, when you, in the Gita, it's talked about the idea of, the ultimate sacrifice. The ultimate sacrifice is that of sacrificing wisdom itself,
Yeah.
meaning exactly this, that
Yes.
you disidentify from it, which
Yeah, from
is
the
when it really takes
yeah.
root.
Then you see the structure of the
Mhm.
wisdom is a interdependent, context-dependent creation, which is beautiful, but it's not you, and it's not absolute. It can't contain itself, and uh, and then you're sacrificing uh, the sacrifice itself. So if you're extremely religious and you've created a holy mountain, uh, even inside your own body, you got to sacrifice that mountain, because the image of the mountain, the images of it are sacrificed, so you can actually get to the real mountain where everybody, all beings happen to be. And it's quite nice.
Yeah, it's very beautiful.
Yeah.
And then, this is all wonderful. And how
That's
do we get
practical.
there? How do we make
Yeah,
this,
from here.
a process that we can then tap into? And we thought it might be helpful um, a little bit this week to go into some of the obstacles that come along that prevent us or distract us from this process. And one aspect that's really fascinating, and we've talked the last couple of weeks about ego function, which you need the ego function, but then the ego function takes over. And that's, just part of the game. And then when you notice it, you rein it back in. But one of the sort of residual aspects that come about due to ego function are what many of you have heard of called the six enemies that crowd the heart, that make that essence of pure love that Richard was talking about in the very beginning, that sort of make it impossible to access. And so, we thought it would be interesting to explore that just a little bit, because it is all part of the process, and even pouring the difficult aspects of experience and the difficult aspects of one's own self and manifestation of self into the chamber of sort of the alchemical process going on inside of you is how transformation starts to take place and how wisdom starts to, bubble up.
Yeah. And so the six enemies, there are many names for them, but they have to do with relationship with other beings. And of course, all, as we know, as we've looked ahead to the back of the book, the beloved is actually who all beings really are. And so this beloved is just this process, which is completely awesome, unexpressible. And so with any being, human beings, many of us, that's, just because of our incarnation as humans, it's mostly human beings, but it could be with the beloved in any form. It could be your dog or cat or kitten or cow or deer. Can you think of any other?
Bunny rabbit.
Bunny rabbits, whales,
Elephants.
dolphins, and elephants.
Yeah. And tiny little bugs and box bugs are particularly wonderful
bugs
at this time of year because they're so mellow.
And trees. And aliens.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah, bless them. And so the six enemies seem historically to be both part of the Buddhist Mahayana tradition, as well as the other traditions in India. And let's see, what are they?
And three are talked about in the Yoga Sutra, right?
Yeah. And
Kama.
Yeah, they're all referred to, but not in a single verse.
Yeah.
So kama, krodha, and lobha are the first three. And so kama, normally translated as lust, is the same as raga, which just means, so it's lust not only in the sexual sense, but it's also lust in the sense of I need that, I really want that. And so you can contemplate so many things, and then you'll get this attachment for it, and from that attachment then you got this raga, and and it usually takes some moments of contemplation. Oftentimes something will arise, but you haven't had time to think about it, and you don't have an attachment. Like if you ask someone about what they want for dinner.
I was just thinking that.
Yes, and it takes them a minute. They have to think about it, and they go, "Oh, now that I think about that, I want that. I need to have that. I have to have that."
Yeah, and I love that you came up with that, because I was just thinking that, when I'm saying, would you like such and such for dinner? Richard often will just say, well, let me think about it and become attached to that idea first. And then we'll say, yeah. So I appreciate you doing that.
And then, anything that, and of course, then the dvesha is equally strong, is the repulsion of pushing something away that gets in the way. And so this anger can become, quite bad.
And that would be krodha.
Krodha.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dvesha, krodha. And then lobha is considered to be greed, in which it's that function, of course, of wanting more gold, wanting more power, more fame, It could be any kind of sense object. And that is also then accompanied by, more of the negative. And so these are considered the initial three gates to hell.
Mhm.
And they surround the heart, and um, they really will upset the prana flow in the body, as you all know, that if you place any being outside your heart, which these enemies place beings, they just toss beings out of the heart all the time. And then if all beings aren't in your heart, then your embodiment is totally conditioned, and it's continuously stimulating suffering. Um, and then the next three, kama, krodha. Moha is considered a tamasic or singular dullness due to uh, completely misunderstanding the nature of reality. And so it's like my view, and that's it. Not realizing that there's endless numbers of views and theories, but it's just this one, and it's very lazy. And so that is
And
that
in
delusion.
that diluted state is often where conflict arises, or where one person tries to sort of have a power play over another, because they are so stuck with that delusion. And also, it's quite likely when you are stuck in delusion that you have either a little bit of krodha going on, some anger towards the other person who's not seeing your view as the only view, etc. So that this is one that is actually a very familiar state that then can cause extreme suffering, and really closing off the heart. We were looking at a Thomas Merton book yesterday and talking about um, the Buddhist story, which we love, of called the three, or the, what is it? I'll think of it in a second. The morning, the 3 a.m.
or the 3 a.m.
Yeah, the 3 a.m.
Oh yeah.
approach, which is what happens in this diluted state. And the story was that there was a man who was taking care of monkeys, and they were doing well. And he knew that the monkeys needed to have this certain amount of food every day. And he gave them the morning food, which he felt, was really important to have 4 portions of this food in the morning.
The other way, wasn't it?
3 portions of the food in the morning,
4
so that
maybe.
they'd be light and agile during the course of the day. And then he'd give them the 4 at night, because then they'd sleep. That was his theory. That was his, stuckness. And the monkeys, of course, objected, and they said, no, that's just a horrible, horrible idea. And he had the choice of just becoming pigheaded and stubborn and insisting that they do this, or he did what he did, which was to say, okay, well, we'll give you 4 in the morning rather than 3 in the morning, and 4 at night. I mean, 3 at night. And so 4 in the morning, 3 at night. And the monkeys were happy. And so the way this sort of Buddhist Zen type story is interpreted is that if you become so stuck in your way, rather than trying to manipulate the monkeys, he was saying, well, this is, the bigger picture is that they need this amount of food. And I have a tremendous love for these monkeys. I feel this sense of kindness and compassion for them. And so I will see who they are. And, you can't reason with monkeys. So I'm not going to try to reason with them, and I'm not going to try to argue with them, because they'll get the same amount of food anyway. And so they were totally happy. He was totally happy. And when we get stuck like this in our views, in the delusion, it's referred sometimes as 3 in the morning. that that's where we are. And and it really brings up the visceral, we were talking about visceral earlier, but the visceral experience of kama and krodha and even lobha.
Yeah. Yeah, that disrespect for
Yeah.
others, which is coming.
Yeah.
That's the seed of it, is this delusion.
Yeah.
And it could be self-delusion, delusions of grandeur, illusions of grandeur, that occasionally alchemists get, even yoga teachers. And then the next one is called Madha. Um, so after moha, there's Madha, which basically means mat is me, 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 me. And it's the basis of pride and arrogance, and it's just self-centeredness. And this can really cause great misery because then you're ignoring other beings even more. And to the point where the sixth one is called Matsarya, which is contempt or jealousy. Is a cruel contempt and jealousy for other beings.
And competitiveness.
Competitiveness, in which, I'm going to get the Philosopher's Stone first. And, okay.
So in this process of, searching for the Philosopher's Stone and for looking within ourselves for wisdom, these aspects, these six enemies arise in all of us. They're the parts of the shadow sides. And the biggest obstacle is when we deny them, when we do not perceive them viscerally and then allow their transformation to occur. Pour them into the pot with everything else, so that they themselves are transformed. And so this process of meditation, the process of bringing focused attention into the present experience, seeing what is right before your eyes, is how we all know, and we've done over and over these practices, but that is how we work with the six enemies, which are bound to happen.
Yeah. And some of them are really, really bad. Mm-hmm. I mean, and so seeing that your own mind, your own ego function, will create what we would call the psychopathic matsarya, the jealous, envious dictator, or in some form or another, or even you project that onto God. Okay, God is this very mean authoritarian figure, and you have, because we have all kinds of theories about the truth, and a lot of those theories are dualistic. We think they're non-dualistic, in the sense that it's, if the ego really takes over, but there's so much unfulfilled rage there, and you can do a lot of damage, and it's exactly the opposite of. And so, but being able to incorporate that in the pot of your own alchemical pot, then it's almost like you're stunned, because you're giving up this extreme hatred of other beings or an other being, and you're giving that up,
and giving
because
up
you're, in a sense, eating it for breakfast. It's because it's you have just as much of that in you, and that's what people don't want to go there. And so that way you start to literally feel all beings in your heart, even the most difficult, which turns out to be your imagination.
And so one thing you can do is, as the course of days go by and you notice that you have shifts in mood or shifts in relationship to other beings, for instance, let's say anger arises, and it might not even be other beings, it might be at your computer or at a, a an app that you're trying to download that won't download properly. Believe it or not, we can get angry about stuff like that. And when, over the course of the next period of time, as you're kind of thinking about this alchemical process, that is an ongoing process within you, that if you can tap into, will reveal these layers of, from the idea of gold and into this idea of wisdom, into pure love. And the one vital thing is to watch things like anger or greed or whichever of these enemies arise. And just if you happen to notice them, and I mention anger because that's one that's usually pretty easy to recognize as like, oh, I'm angry. When we're being greedy, sometimes that's harder to recognize.
Right,
But
because we have
anger,
more complex systems
more
to
complex systems.
justify our greed.
But then remember, we're talking about the embodied experience of it. So when it arises and you happen to remember, oh yeah, let me sense into that. Let me feel my body right now. Like, where am I feeling it? Is there tension behind my eyes? Am I clenching my jaw? And just a little tiny, sort of cues that you get in your body when you are in these states that are unstable. Um, Notice them. And when you notice them, if you have patience with yourself, take one full round of the breath and just allow the breath to soften whatever physical sensation you're experiencing. And it may pop right back like a very, springy rubber band, and it may come right back. But for one round of breath, let's say your jaw is tight, let the jaw soften even a tiny bit. And what happens if you bring consciousness in that form and not making a big deal out of it, just sort of like pausing. And if you do that repeatedly, that is how yoga and yoga practices that you've been doing on your yoga mat, on your sitting cushion, that's how they start spilling out naturally without sort of a contrived system. That's how they start spilling out into life. And that's where relationships are fed. And it's within that environment, that complex environment, that the wisdom and that sense of pure love really exist. So one of the first steps is to take a pause and take a breath, because we forget we're breathing. Just remember, oh yeah, I have that breath thing.
Yeah, and actually the arising of these states of mind is actually, it's nutritious, I think, in the alchemical process. If you see yourself becoming angry at your anger or making a chain, this is actually excellent material, rather than if you were um, lived in a very soft, heavenly suburb somewhere, and there wasn't anything to worry about. Your alchemical process might take, a few billion years more than it's already going to take. But we've got, particularly today, we've got a lot of these processes that if you go, and that's very good for practice, even though, that's why difficult times are really the key.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think, of course, Arjuna
Yeah.
and his problem.
Yeah. So we've just given you a slice, a little glimmer into this idea of the process of alchemy. And we really encourage you to let it sink in, and experiment with some of the ideas that we've been talking
Yeah.
about the last little bit.
Yeah, if we can awaken your curiosity and your fascination and our own curiosity and fascination with what's going on, that's all we want.
Yeah. So we thank you for being with us. If those of you who are here tonight with us, if you want to stick around, we'll stop recording and have time for questions. And there may even be some answers. And we'll see you again at another talk. And so thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.